Hello, welcome to this evening's Mansfield Public Talk. Thank you for being the intellectually interested people who turn your backs on the sunshine and come and hear an event. But I'm told that last week's talk was a little bit depressing. I'm also told that this one is not going to be depressing. It's going to be uplifting and hopeful, so that's fantastic. So I'm delighted to welcome this week Professor Rebecca Henderson, who's going to talk about the integration of love and power, which is a fantastic idea for a topic. Rebecca is one of 25 university professors at Harvard, and she's also a research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research and a fellow of the British Academy and the American equivalent, which has arts and sciences in it. So that's all very impressive. And Rebecca looks at how, spends quite a lot of time looking at climate change and how the private sector can play a role in building a more sustainable economy. And she's also author, pertinently for this, well, she's author of lots of things, but she's also, pertinently to this talk, author of Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire, which was shortlisted for the Financial Times McKinsey 2020 Business Book of the Year Award. There's a lot more I could say, but being modest, she said, just say, this is Rebecca, she's from Harvard. So this is Rebecca, she's from Harvard. Thank you very much.
So, good afternoon. Thank you for your kind introduction, Helen. I couldn't print out my notes, so I am booting up I'm entering the password into my computer so that I have at least something to look at. So, my name is Rebecca Henderson. I am a professor at Harvard. For many years, I looked at innovation in large firms and became something of an expert on innovation and change. And then about 25 years ago, people showed up in my office asking about climate change. And I became deeply, deeply interested in climate change. And working in climate change 25 years ago, I thought we would fix it. It was going to be fine. But it is not going to be fine. I am going to take as ground of this talk that we are in a very, very difficult place. I suspect I don't have to enumerate it for you, right? Climate change continues unchecked, ecosystem destruction, major threats to democracy and the rule of law, accelerating inequality, polarization, AI, the mental health crisis. It's a lot. It's a lot to carry. And it's easy to shut down or deny or tune out, or for those who are lucky enough to be in this position, to grab as much as they can before things come apart. But I want to talk about why this might be an exciting moment, a new moment, a moment of fundamental change, a moment of hope. And in order to frame that, I want to begin by reading a poem. Now, you should know that my professional training is in engineering from MIT and neoclassical economics from Harvard. And I think this is the first time I've ever opened a professional talk by reading a poem. But I want to read it, and then I want to tell you why I'm reading it. The poem is called What You Missed That Day You Were Absent from 4th Grade. So those of you who don't know, 4th grade, it's about 8. So what you missed that day you were absent from 4th grade. Mrs. Nelson explained how to stand still and listen to the wind, how to find meaning in pumping gas, how peeling potatoes can be a form of prayer. She took questions on how not to feel lost in the dark. After lunch, she distributed worksheets that covered ways to remember your grandfather's voice. Then the class discussed falling asleep without feeling you had forgotten to do something else, something important, and how to believe the house you wake in is your home. This prompted Mrs. Nelson to draw a chalkboard diagram detailing how to chant the Psalms during cigarette breaks, and how not to squirm for sound when your own thoughts are all you hear. Also, that you have enough. The English language was that I am is a complete sentence. And just before the afternoon bell, she made the math equation look easy, the one that proves that hundreds of questions and feeling cold and all those nights spent looking for whatever it was you lost and one person add up to something. I don't know about you, but I love that poem. I love that poem. And one of the reasons I wanted to open with it is because that's not what we teach in 4th grade. And I want to suggest that this moment of civilizational crisis, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but it's going to be bad. There's going to be rolling systemic breakdowns in the provision of energy, water, power, major social unrest, insecurity in the food supply. At this moment, what we need is a turn to what's really important. That we have built a society on the belief that technology and policy and knowledge can save most everything. And don't get me wrong, I'm a university professor at Harvard. Helen told you that, and when I told my mother I was a university professor at Harvard, she was like, I thought you'd been a university professor for 30 years. It's the highest honor that Harvard gives its faculty. So I'm a super big deal academically. No, the reason I tell you that is because I am really aware it only takes you so far. That for hundreds of years now, we have divided problems, made them smaller and smaller, and told ourselves that if we could just do the technology and just get the arrangements right, we would be good. And we would build a great world, a world where no one was hungry, where children had enough to eat, where everyone was safe, where everyone had a place to live. And we did do some of that. In my father's lifetime, the population of the earth tripled, but GDP per head quintupled. The number of mothers dying in childbirth has fallen dramatically since the middle of the 19th century, not as a percentage of the population, but in total. Yes, there are still people going to bed hungry, but not as many as there were. We have antibiotics, we have computers, we can get on a plane and fly anywhere we want, particularly for those of us in the developed world who are fortunate enough to have the right accent and the right color skin and the right kind of schooling. Life has been unimaginable for people 100 years ago, for my grandparents. I remember when houses were always cold and the food was really nasty on an ongoing basis. I'm getting a smile from, yeah. We thought that we were doing a great thing and that what we had built we would export to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world was really keen. Let's do full-on capitalism. Let's have the innovation and creativity of markets. Let's find the innovation and the new solutions. Let's build the world. We can solve climate change, we can solve water, we can solve the food systems. And here's the wild and crazy thing. We can. We have the technology and the resources to make this world a garden, to make sure everybody has enough to eat and a safe place and decent healthcare and reasonable education. The numbers add up. There's no question. If you made me director of the world tomorrow, and this is a big asterisk, ensured that it didn't go to my head and I made all the decisions in the public interest and, we could do it. We could do it. So what's so interesting about the current moment is this is not a technology, a resource problem, a policy problem. It's a human problem. We feel lost in the dark. about you, but I spent much of my life on high alert. Don't know if that happened to you. I have a friend who calls it the red zone. When you're achieving, you're doing the thing, you're out there, you can do it, you're getting it done, you're getting it done, you're getting it done. Those of us who have the female persuasion and had children while working, anyone in the room in this group, you know what that was like. Remember what that was like, what that is like? Like, whoa, watch me go. Watch me do it. And at its best, that's an amazing state, and you get a lot done. It feels really fun. But if you create a society which requires most people to be working that hard all the time because they're afraid, they don't have enough to eat, they're at the edge, they're working 2 jobs, they don't know if they're going to keep their work, it's not so good. Because if you're in the red zone most of the time, you then oscillate to the gray zone. You come home and you collapse and you watch Netflix reruns, or in my case, you watch, okay, romantasy, dragons, you know, because it's something to kind of go to another place, yeah? But that's no way to build a society. That's crazy. And what's so nuts about what's happening right now is we have the capacity to do the right thing. But we have told the people who run our largest corporations that all they need to do is to make money, preferably in the next 6 months. We sold the rivers of England to a private equity company who proceeded to make a great deal of money, which, because they were Australian, they shipped to Australia and pumped sewage into the rivers of England. But my goodness, they maximized returns. We have firms who have bought hospital chains and fired nurses knowing that that would result in an uptick in patient deaths. One of my old students was the chief operating officer for one of the largest healthcare companies in the country. And they asked her to evaluate an investment in providing services to at-risk teens. And she made the evaluation and she said, you know, we cannot take on this business and do it well profitably without, you know, can't be done. The only way we could take this business is if we're right at the edge and we don't do a good job. And they said, thank you very much. We'll take the regulatory risk. We'll take the job. So something is wrong at the root. And in some ways, it's really basic. It's really basic. Humans have known for thousands of years that thinking only about yourself, only about your own status and money and power, is a very unskillful way to live. It makes you unhappy because you mistake the accumulation of self and power for the real thing, which is probably purpose and meaning and commitment to the community and being part of something greater than yourself. So, you know, the Buddhists talk about this as the realm of the hungry ghosts. You tell people it's all about money, status, and power, and they go after it, and they get hungrier and emptier and crazier. So we now know that really having tons of money and no one to say no to you, really weird things on the brain. But that's what we've been pushing. And the old idea that no, business should be in service to the community, that government should be in service of the long term, that the important thing is to hold in tension the individual and the tendency to be competitive, which can be wonderful, and the need to love and care. We're not teaching that. We're not living it. It's not in the institutions. A whole way of being human, of being rooted in the internal life. The idea that to our ancestors would seem, I think, obvious, that it's very important to cultivate virtues. That sounds wildly old-fashioned, right? The cultivation of virtue. like seriously Victorian, and I'm not setting the Victorians up as a paragon of virtue. Anyone who knows a little bit about British history will know that there were, let me just say, issues. But it was at least considered appropriate that you should ask people to think about, what is the meaning of your life? What are you trying to accomplish? What do you value? What do you love? To teach people to connect. And so I am saying we need to rediscover this. We need to balance love and power. So this really feels weird for the engineer and economist in me, but I'm saying, okay, love is the answer. Well, that sounds completely wacky. So let's unpack love is the answer. That's why I need my notes. What the heck do I mean by love is the answer? And what would it mean in practice? So, what do I mean? So we have built a world on competition and materiality. We have forgotten that humans are delicate, loving, relational animals. So what would that mean? Well, the first thing it would mean is that we need to start taking care of ourselves. That just living in the red zone and oscillating to the gray zone is no way to live. That we could be in the green zone. You can tell I'm from America. What is the green zone? The green zone means you are in the heart of yourself. You're operating with vitality, with joy. And that is not something you can just decide to do. You have to work at it. The great faith traditions always knew this, that you had to work at cultivating yourself, that deciding to be patient or wise or loving is not enough. You have to practice, whether it's through prayer or through small groups or meditation or being in community where people say, whoa, Henderson, be very careful. Like, that's over the line. The good news is humans have been working on this for a long time. How do I help you find the best part of yourself? How do I help you become more embodied? Because one of our problems is we are brains on sticks. At least I spent much of my life as a brain on a stick. So I speak for myself. I mean no aspersion on the assembled company. But we have forgotten that we have bodies, that we dance, that we hug, that we cry. Our schools, our universities, our firms train people to be robots. It's bizarre that people can say, can robots replace humans? Because if we had a wider sense of what it meant to be human, it would be obvious that robots can't replace humans. That robots cannot resonate, that robots cannot be in relationship, that robots cannot be connected deeply to the beauty of the rose. So, the first step is to rediscover that for ourselves. And if you were taking my class, we would now spend the next 6 classes looking at the neurobiology of humans, of the fact that we have very different ways of being, that the circuit that does cognition and writing and math is often very separate from the circuit that does love and connection and relationality, and how we can keep those in balance. And we would spend time doing deep listening. Anyone in here, when I say deep listening, do you know what I mean? Thank you. At the back. Yay. So here's deep listening. Are you ready for the details of this really advanced, sophisticated technique? Okay. So I ask everyone in the room to spend 3 minutes thinking about something that they love. Could be a pet, could be a partner, could be a garden, could be a river, could be the light on the glass. And then they turn to the person next to them, and they get 3 minutes to describe to the person next to them what you love. And then the other person gets 3 minutes to say to the person who spoke first what they love. And the rules are, and these are tough rules, when someone is speaking, you listen. You don't think about what you're going to say, you just listen. And then afterwards, you don't give advice. We're great on advice. You don't give advice. You just appreciate. And this sounds crazy. I couldn't believe it the first few times I did it. The whole room lights up because nobody gets to be listened to. I know a firm, Barry Weinmuller, you've probably never heard of it. They make mostly cardboard boxes, where the CEO had a revelation at the wedding of one of his employees' children. The revelation was that everyone was someone's special child. And he decided to start running his company as if everyone was someone's special child. Now, as many of you may know, the idea that every human being is fundamentally, existentially important. We could use religious language. We could say they were infused with the divine. We could use the language of human rights and say every human being is unique and special and inherently worthy of dignity. But you can run firms that way. You can run firms where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, where the jobs are designed to delegate power, where you distribute information. They're called high road firms. I spent maybe 5 years of my career looking at whether they were economically viable. Could you really run a firm such that everyone enjoyed working there and was treated with dignity and respect and decently paid? Is that possible? And the answer is absolutely possible. Absolutely possible. Do firms like that make more money? On average, they do not. Why not? Because it turns out they are, as you would guess, much more innovative, much more creative, way more fun to be in. They're more strategically aligned. People work harder because they are identified with the mission and purpose of the firm. There's much higher levels of trust. So these firms are much more agile, much more responsive, much closer to their customers. Really, much better firms. But all that stuff is expensive. You can run a low-road firm, treat people like a thing, make all the decisions at the top, focus on short-term profits. You can make money that way. So I'm not telling you that this is easy. Just as cultivating yourself, teaching yourself that you don't have to be always afraid. Our society is saturated with fear. Our nervous systems tend to be saturated with fear. You could imagine a society which worked with children, with adolescents, with young parents, holding them, helping them, teaching them the techniques of deep listening, teaching them the techniques of connection, of centering. You could imagine a society built of firms that were run this way. You could imagine a society where the government was run this way, where it was a society held together by, let me pick something at random. How about deciding that our major social goal is the welfare of children? That every single child deserves enough to eat and a safe place to live and decent education. I don't know the stats in the UK, but in the States, did you know that 40% of children go to bed hungry at least once a month? Like what? And we know the policies to address this, and they're not that expensive. And if you give people a list of these policies and you don't tell them if they're Republican or Democrat, you get over 80% agreement. Like, yeah, let's make sure the kids don't go to bed hungry. That's an easy one. So we could imagine a society that looks like this, and there have been societies like this. We tend to think it's special or different, but no. Not that special, not that different. I mean, England after the Second War, Denmark, some of the earlier societies, even America in the 50s. As long as you weren't black, apologies, or probably female, pretty egalitarian. Universal healthcare, pretty close. So, if we can imagine it, if I can persuade you to imagine it with me, I want to observe you, I want to suggest, I want to ask what comes up for you, and I'm going to guess that two things come up for you. One is, oh yes, please. So at least some of you, you get that feeling. And maybe I haven't painted exactly the kind of society that you would build. Everyone has a different view. But the idea that we could do like a lot better, and maybe in your society there's like a lot of art and a lot of dance and a lot of creativity. But, you know, we can imagine a much better world. And I'm telling you, we could build it. And then the other part of you, I'm guessing, is saying, you have to be kidding. I mean, yeah, I love it. But, you know, really? All the wealth and power is in the hands of a few rich people who seem to have gone insane and have taken the world to the brink of war, who are not addressing our environmental and climate problems, who are literally burning up the money we could be using to pay for healthcare or education or climate mitigation. We're burning it. And the world is polarized, and I feel awful, and like, what do we do? So here's the dynamic I noticed in the class I was teaching this spring. Is I would be working with the students, and we'd look at powerful examples. We'd look at the history of the civil rights movement. We'd look at the restoration of democracy in Brazil. We'd look at how Denmark went from being a broken country in the 19th century to deciding that, okay, the only way out of this is for business, government, and labor to cooperate, get together, and build the society as a whole. We really don't want to do it. We're aristocrats and business tycoons, but it's the only way to make this thing work. You know, we looked at these examples, and students go, oh, yeah. And they go, but I can't do anything. And it's not going to happen. And I don't believe you. Very politely. Very polite students. So here's the thing. Have you ever heard of socially constructed emotions? No? Super. I never had either. I'm an engineer and economist. They never talk about socially constructed emotions. What's a socially constructed emotion? Well, it turns out, and you know this, that humans are immensely sensitive to what's happening in the groups they're a part of. Because one of the things we learn early as a child is not to step too far out of line, because then you get pushed out, right? You learn that from your parents. There's a certain way to behave if you want to be held, if you want to be loved. You know, I learned from my parents, for example, that passing exams was the way to love. So, my God, I kind of overachieved on that front, but, you know, I could pass exams. So we pick up from the group around us what's important, how to behave, what to pay attention to. And we are swimming in a sea that says, love is not important. It is just a dream. We're going to a dystopian future. You watching the movies? You watching the TV? We're going to a dystopian future. Power is concentrated, social media, and of course we're beginning to feel there's nothing we can do. But it is socially constructed. So one of the things I've been really engaging with is the history of the African-American civil rights movement. Why? Well, one of the reasons is to be black in America for the last 300 years is pretty horrible, at least for 288 of those years, right? First you're a slave, then you're a freedman, you know, you're sharecropping, then you've got Jim Crow, separate but equal facilities. What that means is you get all the junk jobs. You're cleaning the latrines, you know. And for 250 years, 300 years, your job is to tell your children that there is a better world, that you deserve something much better. And your job is to imagine that and make it real and tell each other and hold each other to stand up and not accept what you're being told by the world around you. And then when the time comes, to move, to act with grace and with courage. Now, of course, there are issues in the civil rights movement. But Dr. King's success, which I'm sure all of you know Dr. King's name, right? He built on hundreds of years of activism and investment and support. He was an amazing individual, don't get me wrong. But it's not like he did it all. He was standing amongst the women and the men who had, day by day, year by year, met in small groups, done what they can, encouraged each other, and pushed where they could. Never let themselves lose hope. So I would suggest to you that we are in a much better position than Black Americans after the Civil War, right? They started schools. They took the literacy rate from almost nothing to 50%. 50% in like 30 years. When the whites didn't want anyone to read, ever, and they had no resources. That's incredible. They created Black economic enterprises. They built their community. So this is not impossible. It requires focus and belief. So I've now got so excited I've lost my notes. Excuse me. And because I'm so excited and I have a really complicated password, I mistype it. There we go. So, okay. So, story so far. We over-indexed on cognition, materiality, status, power. In doing so, we lost our relationship with ourselves. We were red and gray. We lost our relationship with each other. Why are our children killing themselves? Sometimes I give really big talks. If I have over 1,000 people in the room, I ask people, put up your hand if you know of someone whose child has threatened suicide or committed suicide. Typically 5 to 10% of the people in the room put their hands up. Like, what? What? So, lost our relationships to ourselves, lost our relationship to each other, lost our relationship to the natural world. We think of the natural world as a resource to be used. That the beauty of a tree or a forest, the glory of the sea, is for us to destroy and take. And so we take everything, because we've told ourselves that making profits is the only goal. And the good news is, if we understand that the problem is in our heads, that we have told ourselves a story about what it means to be human, and that we can change that story, that there is a way out. We have for years told ourselves if only we could implement the policies, if only we could get the technologies, we could do it. And we need the technologies and the policies, but we have been looking in the wrong place. What we need to do is change the stories in our heads, our fundamental beliefs about who we are and what we can do and how we should be together. Instead of thinking of ourselves as consumers, we should think of ourselves, I think, as children of the world, as these incredible miracles. So I don't know about you, but sometimes I look at my hand. Okay, so everyone, look at your hand. Okay, now, decide to move your middle finger. Did it move? Do you know how you did that? You have no idea. We have no idea how our bodies are constructed. How many of you have had the experience of being outside or with a child or with a person you really admired and felt something so much greater than yourself? How many of you have experienced deep joy? Do you remember perhaps on your wedding day or when your child was born or that first bicycle or a dinner party where just everything happens, everyone's talking, the conversation is just perfect? Have you felt that? That's flow. That's joy. That's our birthright. We have told ourselves it's not important, it's for the spare time, it's for later when we have time, but it is for now. Because we cannot do the work in front of us until we rediscover this. We cannot do the social change work if it comes from anger and despair. I spent years in climate activist circles, and it is so easy to hate. It is so easy to say, well, if only those guys would get their act in gear, right? If only they hadn't lobbied against the carbon tax, if only they understood the dangers of, it's so easy to other and to hate. But it doesn't go anywhere. It makes you angry and burnt out. And the people you're hating, they respond really badly. So this is now a truism. But we need to build this thing called civic infrastructure, okay? How many people have heard of civic infrastructure? Oh, great, okay. Well, you're probably years ahead of me. I heard of it last year. Okay, so what is civic infrastructure? Civic infrastructure means you think about your community as a place of joy and connection. And you begin to build the mechanisms that create that community. Whether it's space for people to gather, or parks, or areas for the young people to get together and really connect, or teaching people who are in the, what is the polite phrase now, the later stage of life. That would be me. Okay, I'm now, free on the buses, or whatever it is. So here's the thing. Literacy. Do you know how to teach children to read? I didn't know, but here's the answer. You have someone come and sit with them 3 times a week for 45 minutes and really pay attention and help them read. It's not so hard, right? If you could recruit all the retired people in the community to do that, it's not so hard. How hard is it to show up at the school board meetings, to do the actions, to do the fairs, the runs, to teach our children that this society is worth building and worth holding? But we can only do that if we love ourselves, if we feel that joy. So, first step, take care of yourself. Second step, that's not enough. You need to be part of a small group that reinforces and holds. So, in some societies, that would have been the church. Sometimes it's the watching the football on Sunday. Sometimes it's the quilting group. That's not so big in the US, in the UK, right? In the US, women get together and they quilt or they read. But it's having a group that holds you to account. Having a group that shares your dreams. having a group that says, I am going to generate literacy in this town. I am going to bring together people to talk about what really matters to them. We are going to do deliberative democracy. It's another way you can do civic infrastructure. What is deliberative democracy? Probably some of you know much better than I do, but at a high level, you bring a group of citizens together and you parade experts in front of them. This is how the Irish decide whether to reverse their abortion law. Is you bring experts in and they talk to the panel of citizens and the citizens talk to each other and they really listen and they make a recommendation. And you change the way people think about politics and you change the way people think about the community. So, I think I'm nearly at the end. I'm going to close by talking about learning to balance power and love. Because I tend to overbalance towards love, and if you came to a talk like this, you're probably kind of a love-centered person, I'm guessing. You know, the kids who are doing, studying finance to be private equity, they don't come to this talk. They're great, but they're not here. So here again, this is a quote from Martin Luther King. He said, "Power without love is reckless and abusive," and we're seeing that in spades. And love without power is sentimental and anemic. If we just love, if we don't understand the implementation of love, we won't get anywhere. So if we were going to spend another hour together, I would start talking about accounting standards and the need to change the metrics we use to measure our society. I would start talking about election rules and educational curricula and how we manage finance and how we move capitalism from a focus on 3 months from now to a focus on a year from now or 5 years from now. Because power is important. Power is how we implement. So this is about changing yourself, building a group around you, and then picking a problem. I don't know what your problem will be. I don't know whether it's putting solar power panels on the roof of your local school, or working on the food system, or working with the homeless, or working for a political party and going door by door. I don't know what it is. But if you can keep in mind where we're going to go, if you can remember that imagination is central to this, that having the vision of where we could go is so key to what we could do, and if you can work with others, together we can change the world. Really, I really mean it. It may take 100 years. We are in the midst of what's sometimes called the 100-year emergency. But we can form what is sometimes called islands of coherence. Think of the monasteries in the Dark Ages, which kept the light of learning alive. We can show that you can do business differently, that you can do education differently, that you can do politics differently. And as things start to fall apart, people will want to know, what can we do differently? This moment of rupture, this moment of despair is an incredible opportunity. It is clear the old world is breaking. Together we can begin to build the new. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca, for a marvellous talk and an uplifting one in a moment of rupture and on a Friday. And I was pleased that you started to talk about marrying these sort of uplifting ideas of love with power, because what I had written down as a question is, what is the way in? Is it campaigning to change the way our education works for purpose? is it, if you come to it from a legal or regulatory point of view, saying corporations are designed to reward people by limiting liability if they just do business with people they don't know? That's a 19th century problem. Shouldn't we be rewarding people for doing things that are long term, or have incentivise different things, basically? But where would your way in be?
Sure.
Or would it just be different for everybody?
So I have overcorrected is the problem. So my book, Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire, is all about power and about how you would change the rules so that you could have a capitalism that was just and treated people with dignity and respect. And just to summarize 300 pages in 5 minutes. So step one is to understand that you can pursue social purpose and commercial purpose at the same time. That there are often opportunities which really are win-win. And for example, we could reduce energy use by about 50% across the world by taking advantage of opportunities that are very well understood. Walmart took $1 billion right to their bottom line just by improving the efficiency of their trucking fleet. So there's lots of things that business can do right now, and I talked a little bit about treating people with dignity and respect, raising wages, distributing power, developing better schedules. So step one is to understand that these opportunities do exist and they're economically viable. Step two is trying to persuade people to take advantage of them. So there are a number of ways you can do that. Of course, the most effective, I'm talking to a lawyer, is regulation and political change. So the question is, how do we begin to redevelop a regulatory regime that will put the rules in place that encourage business to act in this way? So that's tricky. As we know, political change is really hard. But one can begin at the local level. So firms, for example, can advocate for the kind of regulations that will constrain them to do the right thing. The global textile industry at the moment is probably the most polluting industry on the planet. They've decided that this is really not in their long-term interest. It's going to create all kinds of problems. So together they are lobbying for changes in supply chain law, for changes in... They were sued by the European Union because they wanted to slow down the rate at which they introduced products, because people were just wearing textiles for just wearing T-shirts for three things and then throwing them away. So they said, let's slow down the product introduction cycle. They were sued by the European Antitrust Authority because antitrust law is written to maximize consumer welfare, not citizen welfare. So this is a real thing. I mean, really encouraging firms to be able to work together so that you don't have the race to the bottom dynamic is key. Changing the metrics would make a huge difference. At the moment, and you might be familiar with environmental, social, and governance metrics, ESG, I spent 20 years on major corporate boards, and if you only measure profits and you only think about immediate returns, and you're not aware of the externalities you're creating or the long-term damage you're creating, and your investors are not aware either, you're going to manage a firm in a very different way. So we need a whole series of metrics. We need to change how finance is run. So one of the reasons capitalism is so short-term is because investment advisors are paid on how much did you make this month, this quarter. The long-term owners of the money often want their money to be used for the good of the whole system. I did a lot of work with the Japanese government pension fund, which is the largest pool of money in the world. And the guy running that firm came to believe that addressing global warming was the biggest thing he could do to benefit his pensioners, because otherwise there wouldn't be a Japan, when they came to retire. Japan's very, very vulnerable to climate change. And so he said, let's manage this money so that we address the long-term issues. There's a room in which we actually know their names. 18 people get together and they control about 60% of the world's financial assets. If we could persuade them that dealing with these problems was in the best long-term interest of themselves and make it legal for them to have that conversation and to make those agreements, then we could do amazing things. And so I start in business, right, you said. But as you said, you could start in education. Are we teaching children how societies change, what their histories were, why democracy is important, how to relate to people. No, there's a whole bunch of stuff we're not teaching. At Harvard, you can get all the way through without any course on what is the nature of democracy, what do you want to do with your life, what is your deepest value, what is the nature of extractive capitalism. All these things we're not teaching. In law, you would know more than I, but and in politics, I think your question is basically, where do we get the political will to do this? Okay, so you're not going to like my answer. The most reliable way to get a society to fundamentally change is to break the society. And I'm afraid that's what we're going to do. So it's only when it no longer works that you really move to something different. That happened with corporations, right? I spent the first 20 years of my life working with corporations. What makes them change is they go nearly bankrupt. So I think what we're going to see is rolling breakdowns that will begin to generate the change we need. In the case of Brazil, for example, Brazil lost its democracy in 1964. At the time, the elites approved. They thought that they would have control over the labor unions, that they would finally have a strong man in charge. But as we know, having a strong man in charge leads to increasingly worse and worse outcomes. In the case of Brazil, people started to disappear. First, they were marginal people. Eventually, the military started beating up the children of the elites, torturing them. So you turn around and you decide to do something differently. And here's the important issue. I'm sorry, I get so messianic about love. I forget the basics of power. Here's the issue. All long-term political movements are based on local organizing over many years. That was what I was talking about with the civil rights movement. So what's really important is we start to build strong community connections right now. Because as things start to get worse, we're going to need them for local community resilience when the water stops coming, when the food stops coming. But then we're also going to need them to really mobilize, to put in place a different kind of political regime. If you think about what's happening in politics right now, the sort of stuff I talked about sounds absolutely bananas, right? No one's talking about moving the society on love and completely rechanging it, because they're just reacting to each other. Oh, I just lost my... Yeah, just lost my... No, it's okay? Good. So we need to experiment with this at the local level, so when things get bad enough, we can cohere and move forward. It took 25 years in Brazil, but they did it. Sorry, that was too long an answer.
No, it wasn't too long an answer at all.
Yeah.
I asked too many questions because I...
No, you want to know the answer.
It's an abuse. We might go on a little while if people need to leave, they can leave, but we... Rebecca asked if we could take questions in groups. So I'm going to ask people to put their hands up and we'll take 2 or 3. Derek, and then there's there's 2 hands there. We'll take those 3. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. It was really, really interesting. I have 2 quick questions. One is, who do you mean by we? That's my first question. My second question is, could you say more about the relationship between love and sovereignty? Because the American cultural theorist Lauren Berlant wrote about this relationship. To love is to give over one's sovereignty, and how in a world carved up according to various forms of sovereignty do you negotiate that tension? Thanks very much.
And then there were 2 hands at this end. Was it yes?
Thank you for your incredibly inspiring presentation. I've got so many questions for you, but my fundamental question is, when you have these conversations with politicians, what sort of reaction do you get?
Okay. And then the person in the room, green shirt.
Thank you so much. I come from a different part of the world, the third world, and so I don't know if my question is still relevant and others would relate, but I come from movement spaces. I come from women's movement, various other movements in India. And one of the challenges I find with a lot of my colleagues and my comrades and my friends is they do not trust love to be honest. They think anger is a lot more honest, and trust is more manipulative. And that's where a lot of my debates with them get stuck. Do you have any suggestions about that?
So we've got who is we, love and sovereignty. What do politicians say? And it's hard to trust. Anger seems so much rawer and more immediate and purer. Okay, so who is we? Thank you, and I should have said at the beginning. I meant those of us educated and privileged in the global north. And my experience has been that for people from the global south or from marginalized communities, I don't have to say anything of this. They know the civilization is fundamentally broken in a deep way. And they know that community solidarity is critical and that building connection is fundamental. So when I say we, I mean those of us who really came to believe that the brain, technology, and power could get us where we needed to go. On sovereignty and love, of course, love is always a dance. I don't know the theorist you mentioned, but just as power has its downsides, love has its downsides. And so one of the things I think we need to relearn is how to negotiate the interaction between love and power and individuality and sovereignty. Because love at its worst can be controlling and manipulative. We won't go into family dynamics, but many of us have experienced a love that's controlling and manipulative and all-encompassing. And so part of the problem, again, of our society, those of us fortunate enough to be in the elites, is because we just shut the door on love and compassion, and we said, okay, it's just about power, we have no practice. So trust feels difficult and dangerous. And one of the reasons purpose-driven firms are not more profitable than ordinary firms is it takes time to learn. You can't announce. I mean, I have known CEOs who have said, well, I've read the research and I've heard that if I treat you all with dignity and respect and we do trust, we're going to make a lot more money, okay? So from now on, everybody trust. It's berserk, right? So as you know, anger is often a reflection of love, but only anger is problematic. So the answer to your question is only with time, only with practice. And of course, sometimes trust is dangerous. So no spill the bullet. To your question about what do politicians say when I say this, I talk mostly to senior business people and to senior financial people. I'm a Harvard Business School professor. I have talked to some politicians. If you talk to family-run businesses or local community politicians, they go, well, of course. You govern for the whole, you govern with respect. This is clearly the right way to run things. As you go up, the more money, the more power. It depends how, such different responses. Some people are doubling down on the existing system, but a lot of people are realizing that it's not going to work. So I have spoken to very rich and very powerful people who say, you might be right. What do we do? How do we do it? I think the concern is all about the transition, implementation. But yeah, there's a lot of openness. I thought when I started teaching this material that my colleagues would think I'd lost my mind. Now most of them say to me, at least in public, I'd love to take your course. It's really interesting. There's something going on in the culture. Something very deep is moving in the culture. I think, you can tell yourself greed is fine until the president set aside 1.7 billion for his personal slush fund. This is all American politics. But it's so out there. It's so brutal. When people are being pulled from their houses in the middle of the night without a warrant. Anyway, you're living in this world too.
And then there's a question about India and
About
India and developing women and
I thought I answered that question.
Okay.
I at least
Yeah,
tried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take one more round of questions. Thanks, you. So there's two hands.
Please, it's
down.
gorgeous out
Yeah,
there.
there's
If you
one-
need to
and there's
leave,
one up
go.
there.
Yeah.
So there's one right up there, and then these two hands here, and then I'm going to. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So yes. So maybe we could go to the one up there, so we can take them.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. My question was simply, when did we get so atomized? Nomadic communities were very much working for each other. Somehow in the north, we've become this atomized society. I wonder what your diagnosis is of when that happened.
Sorry, then can you find?
Oh, golly.
Sorry. Can I just,
Okay, group of questions. Group of questions. Sorry, yes.
So there's one
yes.
here and then one up there.
Group of questions.
Thanks for your talk, Rebecca. You've been talking about how our attitudes and our systems, including capitalism, are what's the problem here. But I wonder if the real problem isn't that. It's actually human nature. Human beings are loving and caring and compassionate, there's no doubt about that. But mainly, across civilizations, we seem only really very keen to extend all those qualities, either to those very close to us, like our family, or very small groups. But what's also evident about human nature is that we are selfish. And it makes me think that perhaps actually, capitalism exists because it's the product of our human nature. And yes, it's been disastrous, and I agree with all you've said, and I love I love the world you're imagining. But I just worry that, whereas we do get progress in science and technology and medicine, you've mentioned some of the progress there, that the one thing we're stuck with is that fundamentally human nature doesn't change.
These are great questions. Last question.
Yeah.
So I work at the intersection of neuroscience and business. My question is, those domains have been trained, or the education and training has for so long been about power. So even if you recognize the importance of love, what advice do you have to bring other people on board? Especially when those domains are really about, objectivity, not subjectivity in any means.
And I have a minute to answer these
You
questions.
have as long as you want, because I've told people they can leave and nobody
So
will
let's see,
rude, so.
where and how did this start to happen? Isn't the problem deep in human nature? And, Rebecca, I think what you're saying is maybe worth a try, but where do you start? Okay. So these are all two questions that are too big to answer. So first, let me say that I am trying to put what I'm teaching up online, where, of course, we address all these questions more slowly and with data and with the underlying research. So coming soon to YouTube, no charge. So send me an email if you want to be on that list, and I'll get it out to you. Where does this come from? Views really differ, Steve. Really differ. You can go back to the Enlightenment and the move away from superstition and, because you can, religion and love can get you into all kinds of dangerous places. And the move to the focus on science and reason and dividing it into problems. And then there's a lovely book by Hirschman on how the profit motive emerged in response to the danger of feudalism. That powerful men, to your point, used to kill each other. And surely it's better that they compete with each other instead. And capitalism was a big advance. So greed was better than warfare. And in the beginning, and some people say it happened with Milton Friedman, post-World War II, and the idea that totally free markets could maximize public welfare. And this gets technical, but again is a big subject in my book. If you maximize profits and you have perfect regulatory regime so that you can't dump the waste in the water and you can't mistreat your employees and you have to pay them decently, free markets will get you a long way. But the trouble with free markets is if you're trying to maximize profits, one way to maximize profits is to play with the rules. So the key rule has to be that you can't play with the rules. And the fundamental problem with the current political system in the US is Citizens United and the fact that we have unlimited money in politics. And it's all in service of maximizing profits. So this is very, very deep problem. This is why I think we're going to have to smash up before we fix it, because it's just a really deep problem. But it all interplays, right? And think about the evolution of psychotherapy and how individualistic it was. You sit with your therapist. We now have a lot of research that you do much better, to your point, if you sit with a group. And that it's about being together and learning to relate together. But it was so atomized and it became self-reinforcing, and of course was so successful for so many people for so long. It seemed to work, right? It really seemed to work. So that's an issue. On the human nature question, oh my goodness, we could just go out for a beer and not come back for a year. Human nature, let me try a very brief highlight. Human nature differs. We seem to have deep proclivity to compete and deep proclivity to cooperate. And a lot depends on the social structure in which you're embedded. So if you grow up in a society that says it's the good of the community and it really matters and you need to defer and we're always working together, you will end up with very different views about what human nature is than if you grow up in Texas. And we know that now, right? If you're following at all the weird research, that a lot of psychological research was done on so-called weird people, white, educated, male, basically young college students at American universities. In fact, if you look cross-culturally, human nature differs quite a lot. And for example, people's proclivity to trust each other, to engage in trust games, there's a huge literature here, but basically it's socially constrained. But we have built a society which says we are competitive, that's the thing, go for it. So we've really downplayed the cooperative aspect. So I don't disagree. Why do we have massive capitalism? Well, partly because we doubled down on that view of human nature, but it's only one, and one could rebalance. We never get to utopia. We've always got to work on it. People always, going to do what they can, but you can build social control, which is really quite effective. And to your question, really do sign up for the class. No, that's to me the biggest question, which is how on earth do we get there from here? And at the moment, what's happening is as people hit these moments where it becomes really clear it's not working, they turn inside. They turn to something deeper and richer and more important. And of course, large segments of the society, teachers, nurses, doctors, have been rooted in care and in love. But what we've done is we've created a social and economic system that's pushing people all the time towards selfishness. So the key is individual work with a teacher, with a group. You can't do it on your own, really, really. And then when you start, what I've seen in business, which is again where I spent most of my time, once you start doing it, it works so well and it's so much better that it becomes self-reinforcing. But you have to get to that critical mass where we're really trying to make it happen and see it. And of course, it's not stable because it's always, the temptation is always to kind of cheat at the margin and be a bit lazy and not follow through. But yeah, this is the great question. It's a question for our times. Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, before I ask you to join me in thanking Rebecca for a really marvellous talk. Yes, really well. We'll do it now. Right. Thank you. I just want to tell you about next week's talk, because I think the three of these talks are last week and this week, and next week kind of go slightly together. This is our annual Milton lecture to celebrate the legacy of the poet and politician and thinker John Milton. The talk next week is by Professor Nick McDowell, who's written a book called John Milton, Poet of Revolution, and it's about lessons in free speech from John Milton and how we balance truth, tolerance, and authority in public life. So, it's going to be a...
kind of the same thing.
If you're beautifully sharp on a beautiful sunny evening, maybe go sharp for that one too. It's 5:30 next Friday. But now I'd like... You obviously so enthusiastic, you want to do it twice, so we'll just thank Rebecca for her talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.